we both had assumptions flowing back and forth. Like she
Unspoken.
assumed a
Yeah.
lot of things about me. I assumed a lot of things about her.
Okay, so when your friendship began, you were two Christian women, two grounded Christian women with experience in ministry, but with different views on racism or how it should be approached. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, I think our views on race, justice, and unity were completely separate.
Yeah. And I think that for both of us, I think I made huge assumptions about Monique because we were both raised by single mothers. We both grew up in Southern California. We had both graduated from Biola. So I made kind of a general assumption. I call it storytelling. I made up a little story in my head that she and I pretty much saw the world in a similar vein. And then a few months into the friendship, I started realizing, oh, that might not be true.
Yeah, and I think the exact opposite assumption, that we would see things extremely differently. And when we had conversations, I think that showed up, my assumption that you're going to see things completely different than me because you're white.
Do
And
do
so
you
we
think
were
that
both
is
reacting
common?
to each other from that posture. I was reacting to her with the assumption in my mind, we probably agree. She was reacting from the assumption of we probably disagree.
Do you think that is common, that an African American person will, from the beginning, assume, hey, we must see the world very differently because of our respective races, whereas a white person is going to assume, well, we probably see things the same way because we're both Christian?
That's a really
That's
good
a
question.
really good question.
I hate to categorize and be like, yes, all Black people probably think this way. I
Right.
don't know. I don't know that. If I were to take a snapshot of just like my friends at that time, I would say yes. That because of the conversations that happen within the community or within the family, about your ethnicity, your skin color, what it means to be Black, especially as a minority in a larger society that is predominantly white, yes, I do think that at that time, the snapshot of my friends, it would have all been like, of course we think differently. Like, of course, you're not going to have a conversation about race because you don't need to, because you're in the majority group. Where we are sitting as the minority and always wondering, what are people thinking about us, because of the color of our skin, because of the way our hair looks, because of X, Y, and Z. And I think some of my thoughts about that have changed over the course of the last 3 years. But at that time, I could definitely say yes. And yeah, I think that depending on, the group you're talking to and where that person comes from. But I think there is a lot of things that we miss just because of sometimes our culture or our cultural makeup.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think for me that is true of the people that I interacted with at my church. If I were to take a snapshot of those people at that time that I was interacting with, I think most of us had not thought too much about our race, our skin color, or even our culture. Most of us were just operating in a world of like, I'm a Christian and I have immediate connection with all Christians. And so it didn't occur to me until we were kind of deep into the friendship. Oh, that's not how Monique thinks of me first. She actually thinks of me first as a white person. And I had been mostly thinking of her first as a sister in the Lord. And so then we were kind of on this crash course. For me, I think part of Monique's project was to make me more aware of my whiteness. And part of my project was I was trying to helping her think about her identity in Christ. So we had very different purposes in a lot of the conversations.
And, in my very limited experience, I have seen that often that is when the conversation shuts down. Oh, I thought we were on the same page about everything. It looks like we're not. I'm withdrawing. This is going to get weird. This is going to get testy, or I'm going to get challenged, or you're going to get challenged, or I don't know what to do with it. And that is exactly when I think a lot of people feel like, oh, well, it's not worth it. It's too scary. It's too what have you. How did the subject of race start coming up in your conversations, and how did you both deal with it?
I remember I assumed that she was a Trump supporter.
Because I was
So-
white.
Because she was white. And I remember asking her back when I still was in South Africa if you voted for Trump, and she didn't answer the question. And so that kind of, I think, just let me know, like, well, Republican, Trump supporter, there it is.
Racist.
Yeah.
I didn't want to make that the focus of the conversation. So I
Yep.
kept avoiding the question
Uh-huh.
because I felt like there were other questions that were more important. So I wanted to talk about policies and issues. And I felt like it was a test. It was like, well, if you voted for Trump, then I'm going to make these assumptions about you.
Mhm.
And so I avoided the question. And because I avoided the question, she went ahead and made some assumptions about me.
Well, I
So,
also
but-
think, though, that there were a lot that what you're just
Yeah.
saying now is that you thought that there were other things that were more important to talk about.
Yeah.
Was an assumption.
Yeah.
Assumption that I was going to judge you. So
Yeah.
I think that we both had assumptions flowing back and forth. Like she
Unspoken.
assumed a
Yeah.
lot of things about me. I assumed a lot of things about her. I remember going on a hike with you and asking some question about racism or something like that. And maybe it was like what you thought about the poor, something
Yes.
like that. And you were like, I don't want to talk about that. And I was like, wow. Where I think for me growing up, I grew up in South LA. We grew up pretty poor. I studied sociology. I worked in social service for the majority of my career. These were all very important conversations for me. And I honestly think that in a lot of African-American circles, these are important conversations on how do you view the world. So when there's someone who's white, who's just like, I don't talk about that. We don't need to talk about that. Like that automatically puts us at odds because it's like, well, maybe you do, but I think that the assumption that can come forward is, well, you don't care.
Right. And I think on that hike, I remember that vividly, that my concern in talking about that was that I didn't want to spoil this nice little friendship I had going with her. And it was still fairly early on in the process. And so when I was like kind of on the fence about, do I talk about this? Do I not? Because I could tell by that point, I probably had a different viewpoint on helping the poor than she did. And I could tell by that point that she had much more, I assumed she had a much more socialist leaning approach to helping the poor, whereas I was also passionate about helping the poor, but I had more of a free market approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, do I really want to start getting into that? We're going on a hike. I don't want to spoil this nice little friendship, but we did eventually have those conversations, but I was very reluctant in the beginning, definitely.
See, to me, this is important because it sounds as though our hesitations based on our presumptions cause us to withhold information, and that can be interpreted as indifference. It's not. It's simply a desire to maintain a good bond, but even that is based on the assumption that we have to be completely on the same page and we can't exchange ideas in order to preserve a good bond.